Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I wanted to chat a little bit about what's going on in Mississauga in regards to the upcoming by-election for mayor. I have lived in and worked in Mississauga for 23 years. So not for my whole life, but I think I know it reasonably well. I have had the opportunity to be the chair of the Mississauga City Summit, something that the former Mayor Hazel McCallion appointed to me to, and I was co-chair of that, co-founder of that for about 7 years, and it was a really great opportunity for me to get to know Mississauga in a very intense manner. We had about 4 different task force for a while, and then it morphed into another 4 different task force and 2 different editions of that city summit, and it was really dealing with how we're going to move, how we're going to live, how we're going to thrive. We had task force on post-secondary education. We spent a fair amount of time talking about some of the amenities around the city and what was needed. And that morphed into the Western GTA Summit, which I also founded and co-chaired, which was an amalgamation of not only Mississauga, but Brampton, Caledon, Burlington, Oakville, Milton, and Halton Hills. And it was an opportunity where almost 1,000 people came together for a full day consultation, which was one of the largest, sort of longest consultations of people from across the Western GTA ever, really. And it was interesting because as we launched that, initially it was going to be just Mississauga and Brampton. Caledon wanted in. Then Oakville wanted in, and then the day we announced our launch, the mayor of Burlington phoned and said, "How come you haven't invited me? These are issues that are important to my city as well." And because of that, I got to know a bunch of the mayors, some of the councillors, and a lot of the issues that were relevant for the area. I also had the pleasure of being president of the Mississauga Arts Council for a while, and on that board for about 7 years, where I got to know the artistic community in and around Mississauga and Peel region, because we ended up having a fair amount of involvement in Brampton and Oakville and areas around Mississauga. And finally, I've been involved in politics, municipally, provincially, and federally, with a couple of different candidates and campaigns. And because of all that, writing some speeches, writing some policy, making some presentations, being on a bunch of TV programs, and also, frankly, this radio show where I've had the opportunity to interview over 1,500 people. I've got over 1,000 episodes. I think I've gotten to know some of the issues. So I want to talk a little bit about what some of those issues are, because I think it's a really important by-election. I think that Hazel McCallion really set the course for the city of Mississauga for a long period of time. And then people that followed her really continued what Hazel had started. But I wonder whether we've got the right strategies right now, because Mississauga and the Greater Toronto Area have changed fairly dramatically, and we've got to be thinking about the future. I ended up having a really good session with Joe Berridge on my show about a year ago. Joe Berridge is the principal of urban strategies. He actually, I met him during the Mississauga City Summit. He came and made a bunch of presentations, and then also at the Western GTA Summit. And last summer, he said, Brian, we've got to start thinking in a very different manner in regards to the Greater Toronto Area. We are now the 3rd largest metropolitan region in Canada, United States, 4th in all of North America, because you got to think about Mexico City as well, after New York and Los Angeles. We are bigger than Chicago, Dallas, Houston, et cetera, and growing at a fairly sizable pace if you go from sort of Oshawa to Kitchener-Waterloo, Niagara Falls, et cetera, with a very large contiguous metropolitan region, which is called a CMA in the way that economists think about it, continuous metropolitan urban development. And we got to start thinking that way in a consolidated, collaborative, visionary manner, rather than us all off into our own little worlds, thinking about competing for taxes for businesses, et cetera. We are one economic engine. We are one economic region. We are the engine, industrial at least, not resource-oriented, but industrial and innovation-oriented for Canada. A vast majority of the GDP for Canada comes from this area. The vast majority of patents, of IP, of employment The first and second largest employment zones are downtown Toronto, and the second is around the airport corporate zone. And some people think that the area north of the 401 in North York is fairly substantial as well. And I don't think we've been thinking about Mississauga as part of this economic region. I don't think we've been thinking about the GTA as this economic region, as we need to and as we should. There's lots of examples of fragmentation, whether it be the fights between, the suburbs in Detroit and downtown Detroit, or all the different parts of Denver, or the different boroughs in New York City. And you could go on with lots of examples: LA versus some of the other parts of LA County, San Francisco versus Silicon Valley. Example after example of when there's fragmentation, infighting, competition, lack of collaboration, lack of a governance structure that really brings people together and works for the common good, that things don't work, that things fall apart, that you don't have transit systems that coordinate, that you don't have planning for sewage and water and infrastructure that doesn't coordinate, that you don't have a vision for economic development and growth that makes sense, and you don't build the kinds of cities, the housing that you need, the social services that you need, because you try to push off some of the problems to your neighbors and you try to grab some of the tax dollars to yourself. And I really worry that that is what has been happening in the Greater Toronto Area, and I think it's wrong. And I'd like to suggest that this, just like the by-election in Toronto that occurred last year, was a way of rethinking the Toronto that Torontonian residents wanted. This is an opportunity for Mississauga to really think about what Mississauga wants. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I spent some time with the GTAA, Pearson Airport at one point in time, and they said, it's really crazy that when we have a fire, we got to get fire from Mississauga. We can't get it from Toronto Rexdale across. And some of the big engines that have got the long ladders are more easily available in Toronto, but because of boundaries, we can't do that. I ended up speaking with a transportation expert from Toronto that moved to the UK, that's one of the foremost transportation experts. And he said, cities worldwide that have two economic centers that are successful have transit that connects them, because people got to go back and forth if you really want to have the cooperation and economic activity and the benefits of agglomeration and social capital, etc. And he used the examples of Canary Wharf to the City of London, of Champs-Élysées and La Défense, of New Jersey and Brooklyn to Manhattan. And he said, there's no transit between the airport corporate zone and downtown Toronto. It takes 45 minutes to an hour for a lawyer, an accountant, or a business person to get together, and they won't bother sometimes if it's just too long of a drive on congested highways. And you should be able to have quick connections. I spoke with a politician who said that some of the orientation in Mississauga north-south, and they use the example of the Huron-Ontario LRT and some other examples of economic development, of residential development, of high density, height, etc., was a little bit myopic in thinking about Mississauga as a standalone entity, not part of the economic engine that is Toronto, and that in reality, for a lot of Mississauga, the orientation is to and back to Toronto, both from a job standpoint, from a sports standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, from a transit standpoint, and that fighting that was like fighting that path that people make across the schoolyard. That you might as well just pave it where the path is, and admit that you can't make people not walk on the grass. I had a politician that told me that she was the individual that persuaded Hazel McCallion to do the Huron-Ontario LRT rather than a LRT across Dundas, and or extend the subway from Kipling into Mississauga, because she appealed to a parochial kind of separate nature. But that initially Hazel really wanted to have the BRT, or sorry, an LRT across Dundas because of the amount of traffic that takes place from people in Mississauga going into Toronto. I think we got a couple of crises in the Greater Toronto Area, and particularly in Mississauga. And the number one crisis is housing. And there's been a lot of talk about it over the course of the last numerous years, but frankly, not enough. And it's really only been over the last maybe year and a half that the conversation has really come to a fore. Number one, with the provincial government in regards to Bill 23, Bill 109, and some of the efforts with the Housing Affordability Task Force that only really presented about not even a year ago, with 57 recommendations, only several of which were actually ever implemented. And then the federal government back last summer saying housing wasn't their responsibility. And finally, at the end of the summer saying, well, yeah, we've got a role in housing. But the municipal governments, and Mississauga is one of the ones that is involved in this, but not the only. Municipal governments haven't taken responsibility. And I think they're living in the past of a zoning orientation that was not allowing development or restricting development, and having some urban design concepts that were maybe appropriate a generation ago, but are not appropriate today in a world where we are building as many houses today as we were building in the 1970s, while our population in Canada has doubled. And you've heard the numbers. CMHC says we need 3.5 million more homes in Canada, 1.8 million additional homes in addition to what we would have otherwise just normally built in the Greater Toronto Area or Southern Ontario. The number for Mississauga is like 120,000, and we're building like a margin, just a small amount of that. And there is naturally some resistance to that from different neighborhoods that have lived in single-family homes and in suburbs and want their single-family suburbs and neighborhoods to stay the same. And I completely understand that. I live in a single family home in a neighborhood, and I quite enjoy my backyard and my pool, et cetera. And so that's the Canadian dream, the American dream, the Mississauga dream, and has been for a long time. But it's not going to, unless we build suburbs all the way to Barrie, Wasaga, et cetera, and completely devour all of the land in Southern Ontario. It's not going to be the solution for the housing needs in the future. And worse than that, if we don't change our attitudes, we are going to destroy the dreams of the next generation. We are going to be the last generation that receives from the generation before a better economic future. We are going to give to our children, and even worse, to our grandchildren. Yeah, climate change, a world that has got some climate change problems, but more importantly right now, actually I don't say more importantly, I think equally importantly, a world right now where they cannot reasonably expect to live the Canadian dream of home ownership. And if it is home ownership, it's a condo ownership in a 500 to 700 square foot little room. And that's a travesty, where the chance that my kids could have the opportunity to buy a house like they grew up in Mississauga, unless they get given it, is not there. We have gone from a house or debt to GDP, to personal disposable income ratio of like 3 times when I was starting out, to like 9 to 15 today, where we have debt as a percentage of personal disposable income that is twice what it is in the United States. It's unsustainable. It's the highest in the G7. It's highest in the Western world. Our housing prices have gone to the stratosphere, with some volatility of late, yes, probably completely called for, but they've gone to the stratosphere. And why? People criticize foreign buyers. They criticize vacant houses. They criticize Airbnb and short-term rentals. They criticize low interest rates, very justifiably to a certain extent. But the biggest problem is lack of supply. And the biggest challenge to lack of supply has been local governments that have restricted supply because of overregulation, too much red tape, delays, giving into NIMBYism, excessive public reviews, and planning departments that are oriented to saying no, rather than wanting to develop good developments. And again, I'm not suggesting for a second, nor is Joe Barrage when he comes and he says we need this different vision, developments where there's height and apartments and condos everywhere in Toronto. He showed a picture of Yonge Street, and said, Yonge Street, and frankly, only around those major subway stations on Yonge Street, other than maybe Yonge and Eglinton, which has grown far beyond that, is there big development. And that a lot of the development in the last couple of years has taken place within a kilometer or less than a kilometer of Union Station. So it's not everywhere, but it is on major arterial roads. It is downtown. It is at major subway stations. And we need that. And then he says we have this crazy bully-balloog. And I've had several other architects told me that this is a real problem where people are scared of height and politicians are scared of height. But yet the vast majority of people don't actually know height beyond like 7 to 10 stories. People, when standing on a road, can't tell the difference if something is 10 stories or 20 stories or 30 stories high. And that may be a slight exaggeration. But if we want to build density, an extra 10 stories is the easiest, fastest, cheapest way of building extra density. And these dreams of everyone turning their single-family homes into triplexes and quadplexes, number one, will change our local neighborhoods. But number two is going to take a lot of time, a lot of effort. A lot of people don't want it, and or they're not going to go through the hassle of the designs, the hassle of the construction, getting a general contractor in, upsetting their neighbors, getting the financing. It's not, I don't believe, going to build the housing that we need, when what we really need is a dramatic increase in housing. And so the housing crisis, I think, is our number one issue, and we've really got to address it. And I think supply is the number one issue, and that's caused by local governments. The second issue is development fees, which are incredibly high, and it's a tax on newcomers. It's a tax on young people. It's a tax on renters that want to get into home ownership. And I don't think it's justified. I think that some development fees are justified, but a tax on new housing that's 130, 140,000, I'm told, and last year Toronto tried to increase it by 47%, makes no sense. And when you're in a housing crisis, it really makes no sense. And municipalities are wrong to continually resist this. The fact that they've got to ask someone else to replace it, the provincial government, the federal government, I agree with that. But to understand how critically important development fees are in restricting supply and harming young people, renters, newcomers, etc., I think is putting our heads in the sand. And I think the federal government made a big move by taking the HST off of purpose-built rental housing, but that should go farther. It should be on condo development. It should be the full GST, not just it should be the GST and the PST, the whole HST that is taken off that. Because we're in a housing crisis. We need to build more housing. We need to increase supply. That is the only way that my kids, your kids, our kids are going to be able to come anywhere close to being able to realize that homeownership dream. And then I think the final issue in this regard is height, and where that height can be built. And I think in Mississauga and in Toronto, historically, the orientation was the height should only be downtown. And you've got to have this sort of teepee that falls away from that. And I'm not sure why. I don't think there's a problem with having height in Port Credit. I don't think there's a problem with having height at Dixie and Dennis. I don't think there's a problem with having height on Huron, Ontario and the 401. I'm not saying through every neighborhood, and Toronto has learned this. Toronto still has maybe the highest height in along Yonge Street, but is allowing height to take place at Yorkdale, at Scarborough Town Centre, at Cloverdale, down in Humber Bay. And again, it's faster, cheaper to build an extra 10 stories than it is to get a whole new development approved and planned and built. And so I think having different nodes, different semi-downtown urban nodes is okay. I think it means that we don't all have to go to Square One or to downtown Toronto or to Yonge and Sheppard to get good shopping, to find culture, to find great restaurants, etc. There can be urban nodes, urban sort of downtown nodes in a couple of different areas. And again, I'm not saying anywhere, not everywhere, I mean, but it's got to be more than just 3 or 4 places in all of the Greater Toronto Area. So I come back to if the people that are currently involved in city government are the people that have not seen the future and not addressed the future, are they the right people that we should be thinking about in leading us to this new future that we need to see ahead of us? And I think about, some of the changes that took place in New York, where 6 different boroughs got together and created the city of New York. In Vancouver, where there's a association of different cities, so they're not amalgamated, but that association of different cities really works well together, and they appoint people to a transit organization that really coordinates things for the whole region. To Denver, where there's been studies that showed when people were competing, different cities were competing against each other, and they had great transit opportunities. 2 decades ago, the local cities voted against it, but when they started to work like a region and plan like a region and have governance structures that would get them together and make regional decisions, they started doing the things that made a lot of sense for Denver. And I do think that some of the work that's happening in Ottawa of late, of Hamilton of late, where they are working more closely together as a region, again, has to happen through amalgamation, but it happens through coordination. Even in the city of Montreal, where there's a council that meets on a fairly regular basis of everyone, all the different mayors, through the city of Montreal, Westmount, and all the West Island, and even the South Shore of Montreal, they are planning in a far better manner than they have in the past. I think we need that different vision in the future for what Mississauga plays a part of its role in the Greater Toronto area, and that the Greater Toronto area plays in its role in Canada. And it's got to be greater collaboration, greater cooperation, more integration in some ways. And I think some of this debate about the divorce in Peel is one example of that, where some of the analyses that Mayor Patrick Brown from Brampton came up forward with showed that it would be economically devastating for Brampton and for Mississauga, as well as, really importantly, for Caledon, to have this separation. And I come back to, we've heard these stories about Detroit when they started competing against each other. And maybe it was caused by racial strife initially, but it was that the money and the jobs went to the suburbs and they killed downtown, and now it's coming back downtown finally. Why? Because it's starting to work together again. Parochialism, whether it's Brexit or Quebec separation or, I don't know, numerous other examples, I don't think makes sense. I don't think it works. I think cooperation, collaboration, social capital, working together, that's the future. That's what makes sense. And it doesn't have to be amalgamation, though amalgamation is a possibility. It doesn't have to be. It has to be cooperation. You could have numerous different mayors and cities meet and work and collaborate on a regular basis. At one point in time, the idea of Metrolinx was that, it would be reporting to a council of the city of Toronto and some other cities, rather than just to the provincial government. So I ask you again, I don't think the only people that should be running for mayor should all be people that are currently on city council, though there are some great people on city council. But I'm saying, if those are the people that created the problem that we've got with housing, are those logically the people that are going to solve it? And maybe they will be, but we got to challenge them. We got to ask them to look forward to a vision. We got to think about a different future. I sat down with Hazel McCallion at one point in time. It was a fascinating conversation. And I think we also have a few other issues that need to be addressed. Transit is another one, and it connects in with housing. Obviously, I think we've been talking about all-day two-way GO trains on the Milton Mississauga line for 10 years, for a decade, and nothing's happened. And why? CP, who own the land, have told me on numerous different occasions that they're willing to negotiate, but no one's come to the table and actually had a negotiation with them. We are shipping dangerous goods, gas, chemicals, etc., right through Mississauga, right through the city of Toronto, right through Scarborough. And I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do. And, when Lake Megantic in Calgary, when we had spills, people got up in arms and forced both the train companies and the governments to come up with better solutions. And other people say, oh, you're never going to have a train derailment in Toronto. Well, we did. 1978, the biggest peacetime evacuation in Canadian history, with obviously a train derailment to Mississauga. And if it happened again, or if it happened in a far more dense Mississauga with residences nearby, and or in the annex or Forest Hill to Rosedale, I bet you we would have a hue and cry. And so that freight traffic, I don't think needs to be traveling right through the center of Mississauga, the center of Toronto, the center of Scarborough, etc. And there has been solutions suggested to solve that. Cost money, but it could solve it, and that would free up those lines. And even if you don't free up those lines completely, you could parallel those lines. I've been told by transit experts that the Mississauga Milton line has an 8-to-1 benefit to cost ratio of being built all day two-way traffic, and that is the highest benefit cost ratio of any transit line they've seen in the Western world. Most have a 2 to 3 times benefit to cost ratio. So we should build it. And when and if we build it, Dixie and Dundas, Huron, Ontario, Streetsville, etc., will develop, and they will be as convenient, if not more convenient, than some places on the Yonge subway line to get to work in downtown Toronto. And I've heard opposition from people in Mississauga. Oh, we don't want a bedroom community for Toronto. But we have this challenge in the Greater Toronto Area that people have got to live somewhere and work somewhere. And why we think it's far better for them to live in Mississauga and drive to a job in Mississauga rather than live in Mississauga, pay property taxes, and take a GO train to a job in Toronto is beyond me. I think both are great. And when that track exists and it's there, we should make use of it and build it. And you take a look at that Dixie GO train station or the Cooksville GO train station. For the few trains that there are going downtown in the morning or uptown in the evening, they're packed to capacity. And so we should provide better transit. And probably intuitively, but there's this concept in transportation of the S-curve. And the more that you increase frequency and make it more convenient, the more people will come. And the biggest difference is when you no longer have to look at a schedule before you go to the station, because you know there's going to be a subway, bus, train coming soon enough that you just go. That's when demand goes up the most. And when you've already got the tracks and you've already got the rolling stock, some of that capacity in the middle of the day isn't free, but it's darn close to free because you've already paid for the stations. You paid for the parking lots. You paid for the rolling stock. You paid for the tracks. Giving some other people rides in the middle of the day costs you some electricity or some gas, but not a lot more. And so I think it makes a ton of sense for us to do all day two-way GO on the Milton Mississauga line. And I also think it makes sense to add a couple of stations. And I've talked for a long period of time about a station near Sherway. 25% of the people that go to Yorkdale come by way of the subway stop. And I think that, and people have said, well, why would you want to do that? You'd have to have a shuttle bus. Fine, have a shuttle bus or a shuttle route or something like that but if you look at the tracks, it comes down not right to Sherway, but damn close to Sherway. But again, all the people that would be coming from Toronto to Sherway by transit would be going in the reverse direction to where the commuters are going. So it's almost free capacity. And a lot of the people that would go there from Mississauga would be going in non-rush hour time. And so therefore, again, it's almost free capacity. I think a station at Cawthra makes a lot of sense. And I'm not sure, but potentially a station either at Eglinton or Mavis might make sense. So a couple more stations might make sense, at least Cawthra. And if you did that and you had it all day two-way frequent GO train service, it becomes like a subway. And even better than a subway, because I think that people prefer being above ground rather than below ground, as long as it's grade separated so that it's fast and frequent. And wouldn't it be great if we had a subway that went diagonally right across Mississauga? The GO train isn't now because it's sort of like a freight train taking people to jobs in downtown Toronto in the morning and back in the evening. But if it was all day two-way frequent with a few more stops, it would be like we had a subway. And I think that makes a ton of sense. I think that there's other transit solutions. I do think we need to have a connection between the north end of the proposed Huron LRT and the GO train. I don't care whether it goes up here in Ontario, whether it goes over to Kennedy. And, a couple of people have had some different solutions, and I think it's Brampton's decision as to where it goes, but it should go. It should go to something. It shouldn't just stop at Shoppers World. There's another proposal that I put forward at one point in time to take it across Derry to the airport, which I think makes a lot of sense, either as a terminus and or as an addition that would take people from Brampton and Mississauga across Derry to the airport. And so I think, and serve the airport corporate zone that's west of the airport. I think that makes sense. I think that the fact that you don't have transit connection between the airport corporate zone south of the airport and downtown Toronto, it just doesn't make sense. And I've talked about that already. And two suggestions that I've got for that are: one, you could take the UP Express south from Terminal 1, extend it to the airport corporate zone, and then you could have people that could get on at the airport and go south to the airport corporate zone, or the other direction to east to downtown. People from downtown could come to the airport corporate zone with one more stop past the Pearson Airport. I think it makes a ton of sense. And if you think about how, the train from de Gaulle Airport in Paris serves downtown Paris, you think about the train from Newark serves not only New Jersey, but Penn Station. You think about the SkyTrain that leaves from JFK, serves the subway and the GO train equivalent, the Long Island Railway in New York. That's the kind of connectivity that we need and should have. I think that the biggest transportation challenge in Mississauga in the next couple of years, I firmly believe, is going to be the incredible congestion we're going to have in South Mississauga with the developments at Mississauga Road and Lakeshore and the development at Lakeview, with no improvements in transportation. And we could have and should have taken the Huron-Ontario LRT to Brightwater, and there were proposals on how to do that along Port Street. And I think we need some sort of a transit that connects up to Lakeview. Lakeview could be, depending on whether this MZO is approved that doubles the density, it could be, 15,000 people, maybe more in Lakeview. And having all those people spill out onto Lakeshore, Dixie, Cawthra, Browns Line, it's going to be a disaster if you don't give improved transit. And, there's a train line that goes right from Lakeview Power Generating Station, where the Lakeview Village is going to be built, that merges in with the GO train tracks and continues on to Long Branch. Could have a shuttle, could have a GO train, could have some sort of a streetcar, could have some sort of solution there. So I think transit is something that we need to think far more seriously about. We haven't done enough. And with the measures that we need to increase density and address our housing crisis in the Greater Toronto Area, in Mississauga particularly, I think that it's going to become even more important. Crisis number 3 is crime. Break-ins, carjacking, home invasions, robberies at major malls. They occur almost daily. In my local community, I think if it's not every day, it's every day or second day. People have been posting about break-ins, and I've been broken in myself, where they just came in through the back door and ransacked the place. Police showed up quickly, but that didn't help. So I think we need community police. I think we need more police. I think we need smart, safe city surveillance systems. I think we need to find some people and put them in jail so that there's concern in the community for criminals, that they're going to be dealt with appropriately. Drag racing, drugs, vandalism, they're also a huge issue. And I think that we've all seen this in our communities to a far greater degree today than we have in the past. And I think we need to have it addressed. And I've been shocked with guns and shootings in Port Credit, and I'm sure elsewhere as well. And clearly we're not doing enough about it, and we need to. So that, I think, is our crisis number 3. And then I think our crisis number 4 is city amenities. And this is parks, this is community centers, this is art establishments, it's everything. And I'll give you a couple of examples of the kind of things that I think we should be thinking about. Riverwood, which is a beautiful conservation area in the center of the city, describes itself, I think, wrongly as a secret gem within the city. And I think the fact that it's a secret gem is actually a travesty, because it should be spectacular. If you take Riverwood, Arundel Conservation Area, Pincham Farms, you have a acreage that is comparable to Central Park. And I presented to the board at Riverwood at one point in time, and a professor at U of T said, you've missed a real point, because if you added in the contiguous area at Mississauga, at the University of Toronto, Mississauga, onto what you've just described, Brian, you would have an area rivaling Stanley Park in Vancouver. But that area is not as important to Mississauga and as well known to Mississauga as Central Park is to New York, or Stanley Park is to Vancouver, or even High Park is to Toronto. But it could be and should be. And so why not? Why haven't we developed it? What could we do to develop it, to make it that kind of an area? You think about the McMichael Gallery that's made the conservation area in Kleinburg and made Kleinburg a thing. Should we have a major art establishment? Should we have a museum to Hazel McCallion? What is it that could, the lawn where concerts are held in Central Park, or the skating rink in Central Park, or the Totem Pole Museum in Stanley Park, or the seawall? What is it that we could have in Arundel, Riverwood, Pincham Farms that makes it as important to Mississauga as Central Park is to Manhattan, as is Stanley Park to Vancouver? We've got this farm on Huron, Ontario, just north of Bristol, the Britannia Farms, that is one of the largest vacant lands, farmlands in urban Toronto anywhere. And we haven't done something with it. And now we're thinking about developing it, which I think is, again, a travesty. It's this huge opportunity. And I'm not suggesting that should be a Black Creek, Pioneer Village West, but we could have something there that makes it an incredible opportunity for people from around the world that have moved to Mississauga to experience rural Ontario and understand our heritage. And it doesn't have to be the whole lands, but it could be and should be some of those lands. I think that we've got an unbelievable port building in Port Credit that is one of the largest port buildings on the Great Lakes that we're going to supposedly turn into a bunch of condos. Could be a farmer's market, could be St. Lawrence Market West, could be Granville Island Market East, could be it could be, Pier 57 from San Francisco. I don't know what, but you've got this massive structure that's right on Port Street that sticks out into Lake Ontario, that is owned by the federal government. And we should be thinking about how to make it an incredible amenity for all people in Mississauga. The Living Arts Center, I think, was brilliant vision of Hazel McCallion and former councillors, but has it lived up to where it should be today? Is it that center of culture today that it should be? And there's been some proposals to add a hotel to it, maybe expand it. I think we've got to have a vision for that Living Arts Center and what it could and should be. And then I think there are really interesting cultural establishments in different parts in Streetsville, the Masonic Lodge in Port Credit, the Legion, and elsewhere around the city that could and should be upgraded to be incredible cultural establishments going forward. And then the waterfront. I think Toronto has really done some good things with their waterfront. We're criticized. Toronto was criticized a lot for Harbourfront initially, but you walk on that boardwalk, whether it's in the beaches or Humber Bay today, you walk around Humber Village, lots of condos, but the land in front of it is, I think, beautiful. I don't think we've done that in Mississauga to the extent we could and should. The trail is broken up. We haven't made it contiguous. We haven't made it accessible. It upsets me every time I go down there and I see these big signs, parking tickets tripled during the summertime. We should be finding a way of making it available and accessible to people rather than restricting and increasing the parking tickets so dramatically. So I think that we need a vision for amenities that make Mississauga just a wonderful place to live and work. And then I think my fifth thing is governance. I think taxes, debt, deficits are high. I think that development fees are atrociously high. And I think that regrettably, some of those taxes might actually have to increase if we're going to pay for all the expenses. And so I'm sitting there going, why? What is it that we've done such that we don't have an efficient system. And I really wonder whether this parochial nature of being on our own and competing with Brampton, competing with Toronto, competing with everywhere else makes sense. We should be thinking about cooperation. If you think about what the hospital has done by merging with 3 different hospitals, you think about what the United Way has done by merging with Toronto, you think about what any company would do by trying to become more efficient. Have we become less efficient? We certainly haven't become more efficient. You think about what Toronto did by reducing the number of councillors in half and getting rid of 4 mayors. Should we be thinking about getting rid of 2 mayors and amalgamating with Brampton and becoming the 3rd largest or 2nd largest city in Canada? And what would happen if we actually, instead of separating out and doubling up in services, amalgamated and got rid of 2 mayors and then had, like Toronto did, 1 councillor for every riding, so we halved the number of councillors, and had 1 planning department rather than 3, and 1 building department rather than 3. I think that, there was some reaction negatively toward amalgamation in Toronto, but I'm not sure a lot of people in Toronto would go backwards, particularly if they thought the taxes were going to go up if they went backwards. And I think that there might be a lot of people in Peel that, if they thought there truly was efficiencies, would actually be supportive of a more efficient governance structure. I think we are way too over-governed and way too much regulation, too much red tape, and I think that there is an opportunity to make sense here. 1996, Anne Golden, I think it was, did the GTA task force, and she recommended the amalgamation of Toronto. That's the only thing that Mike Harris took from that report and implemented. But she also recommended the amalgamation of Mississauga and Brampton into 1 city, Oakville and Burlington and Milton to another, all of York into another, and all of Ajax, Pickering, and Oshawa into another, such that you'd have 4 cities ringing Toronto, and those 4 mayors plus the mayor of Toronto, 5 altogether, would create a new GTA council that would do economic development, transit, planning, airport, all those things that are of a regional nature, not like the old Metro Toronto Council. So not another level of government, but a coordinating entity. And, we pride ourselves in Mississauga about being, the 6th largest city in Canada? What if we were the 2nd or 3rd largest city in Canada, which we would be if we amalgamated with Brampton? I think we'd get a lot more time and attention. I think we'd have a lot more of a role that we would play in the politics of the province and the politics of the nation. And I think that we would attract more economic development. I think we would attract even more head offices of U.S. and European companies if we had that kind of status, and people knew worldwide that we were the 2nd or 3rd largest city in Canada. So I do think that there's an issue on governance. I think we spend too much, and I think we need to have a very aggressive investigation of spending and looking at efficiencies and try to figure out how we can change that. And so I think that there is a couple different crises that we need. And I guess I should add to my discussion of spending. I think that we have a coming crisis. We've talked about affordability of housing, but I think we have a coming crisis of long-term care, where the baby boomers retire, get older, need care in their homes. We don't have enough institutional properties that they can all live in, we can all live in, and they're going to be living at home. And I don't think we've thought about that. And that, I think, is going to fall on the healthcare system that the provincial government runs, but a lot of services that the municipal governments run. And I don't think we've even thought that through. We're going to have to change housing. We're going to have to change parks. We're going to have to, stupid thing, like, maybe it's not stupid, actually really important, but you live longer if you go out for a stroll in a park. Seniors want to go for a stroll in a park, but the 2 things that they value the most in a park is a bench and a washroom. Do we have benches and washrooms that are conveniently available for our senior population that are going to be, 2 and 3 times as great in 10 years as they are today? And they're going to be wanting to live at home, not be institutionalized. I think, and care and hospices. Are we thinking through these issues? We need to. And it's going to hit costs. And so therefore, we need to have a governance structure, a spending situation that makes sense. So I think we need to aggressively and comprehensively investigate efficiencies and saving opportunities. So I think there are these 4 or 5 crises. Number 1 is housing. Number 2 is transit. Number 3 is safety. And number 4 is amenities. And number 5 is spending and taxes. I think we need to be addressing these issues in this election, and we need to be requesting/demanding from the candidates. Don't just tell us that you've been in politics, in federal, provincial, city politics for the last 20 years, and so therefore, you can do it. I want to know what your vision's going to be, how you're going to change things for the better, what your vision for Mississauga is, what your vision for how Mississauga plays in the Greater Toronto Area. I want to know that these challenges that these crises that we have, how you're going to solve them, rather than just because you've been there for 8 years, you deserve to get the next job. Anyway, just a couple of ideas, a couple of thoughts, because I think this is a really important election. Who we elect mayor is going to be setting the tone for Mississauga going forward. Anyway, that's my show for tonight. Thanks for joining me. I'm Brian Crombie, Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos are available on my website, briancrombie.com. Good night. Thanks for joining me.